Unfortunately. Sadly.
It's funny though. It's only my mom who ever calls.
Did you send I told you?
Facebook, sorry.
Okay, I heard about it.
Oh, there you go. I heard you.
What is that?
That's me.
Yes. All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Mount St. Vincent University and tonight's event, Imagining Black Justice. And of course, tomorrow, if you haven't signed up, you can still sign up for workshops. So there's a component tomorrow with workshops with Yusra and Desmond, and also a community conversation in the afternoon. So if you didn't know about that, there's still time to participate. So before we start tonight, we do want to acknowledge that Mount St. Vincent University is on unceded and unsurrendered Mi'kmaq territories in the homelands of the Mi'kmaq people, and also, of course, that Mount St. Vincent University was implicated in residential schools, for example, through the Sisters of Charity. And when we do land acknowledgements, I think it's really important not to just say it as this ritual thing that we say before we move on. So an event that's talking about the justice system, not only the courts and prisons, but also how justice and injustice look more broadly in health and education. We, of course, can't not acknowledge the recent report that just came out from the inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and acknowledge the genocide in that report that is made clear to all Canadians, and of course what that also means for Black people as settlers on this land as well. I think that also moves us to think about Black and Indigenous solidarity in this country and what that looks like and what our responsibilities as Black people are, and also, of course, to think about all the ways that anti-Blackness and colonialism and anti-indigeneity have been tied in Canada. So as we move through the event tonight, even though we're obviously focusing on issues that impact Black people, we acknowledge that these issues, of course, also impact Indigenous people in Canada, and we don't want that forgotten. We want to make sure that that's also central to what we do tonight. And I know people will also probably be talking about that as they speak as well. So that's really important. Tonight was conceived as a casual conversation. I'm like, don't bring PowerPoints. So we're just going to be, everyone's going to do, no, notes are good, but people are going, the way we're going to proceed is that they'll each do a bit of an introduction, speak a bit about their work, and then we'll have a conversation between us, led by me, and then there'll be time for questions from you. So when we started this event, when I conceived of this event, there's a number of things happening. So the 30th anniversary of the Donnell Marshall report is this year. Of course, Donnell Marshall was wrongfully convicted of the murder of a Black man, Joe Seeley, and spent 11 years in prison. The report into that was the first report, and in many ways the only report for many, many years that acknowledged the injustice in the court systems, policing, and prisons in Nova Scotia. So this marks an anniversary there. Of course, we've had the Wortley report, the Ontario Human Rights report, reports into policing in Thunder Bay and Indigenous people in Thunder Bay, the Tulloch reports. There's been a number of reports within the last year that have really brought these issues to the fore. So that's another reason to be having this conversation in this community at this time. So those are some of the issues that we wanted to bring forward and speak about. And I'm really happy that I was able to bring in all these amazing, not only bring in, OmniSoore lives here, but that we were able to gather together all these brilliant and amazing people to speak to us. So I'm not going to do formal bios. They are on the posters that you can look at. But going left to right, this is Desmond Cole. Desmond is a journalist, an activist, really active in the fight against carding. His essay, The Skin I'm In, was published in Toronto Magazine, and Toronto Life Magazine, and went on to the documentaries made. He's just completing his first book that will be released in the new year, so look out for that. And radio show and all kinds of things. Next to him is Dr. OmniSoore Dryden, recently inaugurated, I guess, as the James R. Johnson Chair of Black Studies at Dalhousie University, which is taken up in the Department of Medicine. OmniSore's research deals with the Canadian Blood Services and the blood ban, and how anti-Blackness and homophobia and colonialism intersect in the health system as well, and through the blood ban. Anything else you want me to say about you? No. And definitely, I mean, just check OmniSoore through the night, through your time. She's here as the Chair of Black Studies, so go shake her hand and talk to her about her research and everything. Next to her, Dr. Carl James. A lot of people that are familiar with education scholarship know Carl's work. Carl works extensively and has done a lot of work to talk about anti-Blackness, racism in the school system, working with Black students, mentoring Black students. You have an official title, Carl. A chair of something.
The Jean Augustine.
The Jean Augustine Chair
in Education, Community, and Diaspora.
In Education, Community, and Diaspora. So there's heavy weights on this stage right now. So Carl has mentored many people in the field of education, speaking about educational injustice and justice. And at the end of the row is Yusra Khugoli Ali. Yusra, many of you may be familiar with as one of the co-founders of BLMTO, but Yusra is also moving into new phases in her organizing and activism. She's organized a lot against carding and against police brutality in Toronto. She organizes against incarceration for children that are being beaten up and arrested in schools, and also is really active in the the diaspora community in Toronto as well. So we have an amazing group of people on stage. I want to give them a big round of applause. So it's going to be fire on stage tonight. So I drafted on the show, and by the way, we know it's the Raptors game, so we are going to wrap up in time. So so keep it moving with your questions, right? So we're going to begin with OmniSoore. We'll move through the panelists and have about 10 minutes, but I'm not rigidly timing you.
No timing.
And then we'll talk a bit on stage amongst ourselves, and then we'll open up the questions.
Thank you. I moved to Halifax April 30th of this year. And recently was away from Halifax for 2 weeks, and now I'm back. So I'm not sure if that means I've been here longer than I've been gone. So thank you, Al. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I feel like I'm kind of at home because when I'm out and about in Toronto, I just recently moved from Toronto, I would often run into these beautiful people on the street when you're out doing Toronto things, like getting way too expensive coffee or way too stush donuts, you know what I mean? Or just living our Black lives. So as I do, I begin with respectfully acknowledging our collective benevolent ancestors, Indigenous, Black, LGBTQ, and Two-Spirit, who were here, were forced here, and continue to make home here. So, I'm the James R. Johnston Chair in Black Canadian Studies at Dalhousie in the Faculty of Medicine, and an Associate Professor in Community Health and Epidemiology. That's what it says on my business card. Other than that, I'm OmniSoore. I've been in different venues in my life, and right now I'm in this kind of academic, chair-heavy venue. And part of this role is to, what I would say is engage in a form of harm reduction within a really harmful space, which is the academic setting, which is the university, which is not a welcoming or inclusive or supportive space for many people, but specifically for Black and Indigenous folks. So I envision the chairs being deployed in a way to interrupt that space that can better support Black students, African Nova Scotian students who are interested in getting a medical degree and want to be able to do that without, any more harm than they would need to go through. And more than that, actually wanting to complete the degree with the greatest amount of mental health as they can muster through that process. Too many of us graduate from university, undergraduate, graduate degrees, PhDs, and the cost of that ticket has often been the cost of our health. Those of us who teach in the university, Black women, Black queer folks, Black LGBTQ folks, Black men, Black folks with disability, often die in their 40s and 50s while on the job because of the anti-Black racism, the misogynoir, the racist homophobia. So one of the things that is a challenge for me in this work is I'm a PhD, not an MD. That's not a challenge for me, that's a challenge for them. I'm really happy I'm a PhD. I got that PhD with all the women in my family, so I carry that with pride, which is why my Twitter handle is Dr. Dryden. I carry that to also hold all of the women who held me down that allowed me to do this work, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be sitting here. But part of the challenge is when you talk to MDs, and you've all had these experiences, and Black folks have had this experience, when you go to talk to a medical doctor, they often presume to know your body better than you know it yourself. They often presume to tell you what you are feeling or what you are not feeling. And then they will go on and tell you, well, you don't need that medication when you do, or you do need this medication when you don't, or they continue to pathologize you and at times incarcerate you. So there's this belief that medicine and science and health are objective forms. They're objective, they are colorblind. Nothing about them is steeped in anti-Black racism. So the first medical school in Canada was opened in 1826, 1824. So what was happening in this region that we know, Canada, in 1824? Colonization, slavery, war crimes, what we would today call war crimes. This is the same time that there's medical education happening. I wonder what that medical education is founded upon. At the same time, the cutting-edge science of the time was this thing called monogeny and polygyny, and today we would call that scientific racism. Back in the day, it was called the science. It was considered the hottest thing on the block, the newest thing on the block, and everybody adhered to it. So monogeny, based on a Christian framework that believed the closer to what you were, the closer to God you are. Monogeny believed that white people were one race and one species, and everybody that was not white, specifically Black people, Indigenous people, were a completely different species, not human, therefore would have no access to the kind of human dignities that humans would have. Polygyny was the one where it's like, oh yeah, we're all part of the same species, but the white race is the best race, and all the rest of them are like not fully formed human beings, but they're still part of the same species. And this is where it's out of that, and we still see scientific racism happening today, because people talk about races. People will deploy this word Caucasian, as if it didn't come out of this scientific racist moment, and if it isn't, and as if that term Caucasian is not inherently and deeply a white supremacist term, right? And so these are the things that we are still battling in medical and health interventions today. Black people don't experience the same amount of pain as white people, therefore they don't need the same kind of pain management as white people. You know, pretty much everything we know about gynecology today is because of Dr. Sims, who tortured, enslaved Black women, which meant that these women, our ancestors could not give consent. But all of these experiments were performed on enslaved Black women. And I'm going to move on a bit, but I do want to talk about, so I'm currently working at a university where the interim president is all like, blackface isn't a big deal. Why are you all so consumed by it? And boys will be boys. So I want to talk about blackface in medical education. So remember early medical schools in Canada, 1824. If you've ever gone to a frat party or ever gone to any kind of enclosed, predominantly male sports event or team, there's a way in which team building happens through hazing, but also happens through solidifying a group at the expense of another group. So in 1824 and on, early 1900s, medical schools would take deceased people, would take their bodies and experiment on them. And the easiest bodies to get were Indigenous bodies and Black bodies. But then they would pose with those bodies, or they would pretend to be those bodies. And this is where you see the conflation between blackface and medicine. We still see the outcome of that. I have a lot more to talk about medicine and health, but I just want to talk briefly about something that happened last week when I was in Vancouver at Congress. It's an academic conference of the Society, Social Science and Humanities Federation, which happened at UBC. It's one of the first times I've ever been to the Black Canadian Studies Association. But you know, I just got this title and I thought I should probably go to the Black Canadian Studies Association conference. So went to UBC, it was great to see colleagues. it was the first day this young man came in, we were talking, and then Dr. Fuad Cooper, who's the outgoing president, said, we need to let you know that this young man, Shelby McPhee, was falsely accused of stealing a laptop and had the RCMP called on him. So that's the thing with UBC. I used to work at UBC. Whenever there's a police matter, they don't call Vancouver Police Department, they call the RCMP. Shelby's a student at Acadia in Wolfville. He's an international student. He lives in Bahamas. And so I just can't imagine what his life must be like in Wolfville, you know, especially in the winter. I haven't been in Wolfville enough. But then you go home to Bahamas and you're like, okay, this is cool, I'm going to a conference. I'm going to Vancouver. It's a big city, it's not Wolfville. It's gonna be fine, I'm gonna have a good time. And less than 24 hours after being there, you have to deal with the RCMP. And he left that with his life, right? So the Black Canadian Studies Association, and obviously in collaboration with Shelby, this is Shelby's experience, wrote a letter to the Federation, an open letter to the Federation demanding that they intervene, but demanding that they intervene mirroring the demands that Shelby had made, which is that they name who the accusers were, that they eject the accusers out of the conference, and some other demands which we can go through later, and that they apologize to Shelby and some other things. It took them about 3 days to finally issue an apology to Shelby. They never did eject the accusers, and you know, Conference Kathy and Conference Colin, we still don't know their names. And somebody does, but you know, Shelby's back in Bahamas now, and we talk, you know, quite frequently, and the response on Twitter and Facebook and other than that has been really strong. But the thing that fully concerns me is what we lost in that experience, not just Shelby, but the rest of us, and how we carry that now that I'm back in. I came back to Toronto and I'm back in Halifax. I think there's a way when you do this justice work, I think people think that we just, well maybe not always, but people think that we just kind of always have our shit together and we're always just in front of a mic or talking to the media and you kind of know what to say and what to do. And there's some people who are really good at it, like these two, and I suck at it. But these two are like seriously a master class in it. But for me, I have such anxiety around not making the right step or not saying the right thing, not supporting Shelby in the right way, not asking for enough. You know, we should have asked for more, to be honest. We should have asked for more from the Federation. But there's a way in which that kind of self-doubt is a colonial position, that I don't quite know my voice, so I'm extremely tired, and so I'm having all the feels right now. That I don't quite know my voice, or shouldn't quite know my voice, or you know, if I don't quite know my voice well enough, then everybody will be able to pounce on it. And I think part of my commitment to Black justice, which fits into medicine and health, is trying to be kinder to myself, eating dinner, cooking. You know, money's tight, and so making sure I can cook meals that I actually enjoy. Being in Halifax gives me a better quality of life, surprisingly, than being in Toronto, because I walk to work every day, and there's no, well, I haven't encountered any pollution yet, so that's kind of cool. But I'm still haunted by this experience in Congress, and it's compounded by all the other moments that I'm haunted by the experiences, and this is the continuing outcome of anti-Black racism. So this justice that we engage in is about trying to slay those ghosts, trying to vanquish those demons, just so that we can live. Just so that we can live our best lives. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you, OmniSoore. Desmond, I'm going to just jump straight to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elle, for making this happen. For all of the work that you're doing here in Halifax that I know, we could go on and on about it, but I just want to take a moment to say that, it's really important for me to tell everybody here how much Al does that people don't see. And I just want to say I know it's been tough for you lately, homie, and I love you, and I just want to be thankful for you doing this and putting this together with everything else that you're doing. So I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about, I'll start, Mike and Mishire, I'll tell you a little bit about the work that I'm doing right now. I have been hosting a weekly radio show for the past 4.5 years now, and it's every Sunday. So I think yesterday was the first Sunday this year that I wasn't on the radio so far. I don't take a lot of Sundays off, but I like the platform that I have. I have a platform on an extremely conservative, angry, drive in your car and rage at the world kind of radio station. And actually somebody recently was challenging me and suggesting that I shouldn't actually do my radio show on this radio station because it doesn't jive with my values. So to what you were saying about the institution, and you're in a place, but the place that you're in is doing things that are harmful to you and to your family, to your community. I don't know when that is not the case, right? I don't know where I was supposed to go. But thank God that we're able to use that platform to do a lot of really important things. A few weeks ago, I talked about an experience of racial discrimination that I had on transit in Toronto. And after describing what happened to me, I invited my listeners to call in and tell their own experiences of facing discrimination based on their race, their gender, their sexual orientation or identity, or expression. Whatever they were facing, call in and tell me about it, because I'm sharing this experience that happened to me. And a woman called in, and she was actually speaking to me from a shelter, a city-run shelter in Toronto. And she was really upset. And she said, Desmond, that thing that happened to you, so what happened to me, by the way, was that I was on a streetcar, and a white woman who was sitting opposite me, our backs were facing each other, she turned around a couple of times, I'm not gonna hit you, and she shoved me from behind, hit me like this. And this first time I thought it was an accident, and then the second time I knew it was on purpose, so I turned around and I asked her what she's doing touching me, and she said that she could hear me talking on the phone. It was a Saturday night in downtown Toronto. There was 200 people in the streetcar talking and laughing and having a Saturday night. And this white woman touched me and pushed me from behind 2 times because she didn't like that she could hear me talking on the phone. I told that story on the air, and this woman called into the radio station and said, I know you're telling the truth about what happened with you and that woman on the streetcar, because I'm in a shelter, and that's how they treat me here. And she said the way that that white woman laughed at you, Desmond, after she did it, that's how they laugh at me here in this shelter after they do it to me. So I know, my son, that you're telling the truth. That's what she said. So when you're in the studio at the radio station, you're sitting like this as the host, and then over here, there's 2 windows, and you can see your producer here, and your board director who does all the sound and the commercials and all that. You can look at them. So when this woman starts telling the story, I'm signaling to them, keep her on the air, keep her on the air. The next day, I met this woman, 57-year-old black woman from Ghana, came here in late 90s, early 2000s, survived a stroke, so she is disabled, and walks with a walker. She has type 1 diabetes, so she's taking insulin several times a day. And a week after I met this woman who had called into the radio show, they tried to kick her out of this shelter that she was at. And myself and some other folks in the community just sprung to action. It's a really terrible, terrible story that I'm not going to tell all of here, but it was winter in Toronto, and they forced this disabled woman with a walker on insulin out into the street in the middle of the day because they wanted her out of the shelter. They said it was an emergency, but no police were ever called. Like, don't get me started because I'll just go on all. It's so enraging what they did to this woman. But we tried to get her enough support that she could go to another shelter. And we were successful in that. And then the people in the new shelter started working with her. And they actually identified a housing opportunity because she was in transitional housing in this place that she called us and said she was being abused at. She was hoping to find some secure housing down the road, but a worker at this new shelter that she was at helped her do that. And a couple of weeks ago, she actually moved into that housing in Scarborough. You can clap if you want to because it's a good story. And it's not the end of this woman's struggle, but like, because Black people listen to the show, and because it's become a place for us to have some conversations that are hard to have elsewhere, I know it's on conservative talk radio, but I'm still there because of people like this woman who, that's become a space where for our hour, 1 hour a week, we could do some things. We can have some conversations, we can reach each other, we can connect with one another. I've been working mostly on that radio show as like my public intervention for the last while, and it had otherwise been pretty quiet for me. I have a very, very big mouth, and I haven't been as loud lately because I've been working on a book, as I'll mention, where I'm trying to document a whole bunch of stories and connect them together to talk about what the modern experience of anti-Black racism and white supremacy is in this country. And I have stories from out here in Nova Scotia, and I have stories from Alberta, and I'm trying to kind of sew and weave together 13 chapters about the Black struggle in this country. One of those 13 chapters actually being about I Don't Know More and Indigenous struggles, because as you were saying at the beginning, Al, I do see those struggles as being very interrelated and wanting to talk about building solidarity with Indigenous peoples who are also fighting these colonial systems that we're fighting. So I guess this is like the last thing I'll say is that I'm doing a workshop tomorrow. And workshop is about something that maybe we'll also get into here a little bit too. It's about surveillance, and it's about understanding how surveillance is like this shiny object that is being offered to us instead of justice, instead of like freedom, instead of, we're being offered actually, like we're going to control you more actually, we're going to watch you more, we're going to have technologies. So you want to be free of police brutality, you want to be free of carding, and you want to be able to walk home safely, you want your kids to be able to go to school without being suspended or expelled, you don't want to be harassed at work. How are we going to solve those problems? Mostly, we're going to surveil you. And I want to talk about the ways in which it's really actually tempting to accept some of these offers. So a police officer shooting people, we'll put a body camera on the police officer. And maybe the next time the police officer shoots somebody, we might actually catch them. And how many Black sacrifices are being asked of that in the process, and how many Black people have to die and be harmed for someone out there to believe that there's enough harm being done to us to just take the guns away from the police, to take away the license to kill from the police, to stop the expulsions in the schools, like just stop doing them. Because they're gonna target our students. Stop pretending there's gonna be a new magic formula. So I really want to talk about that, and I want to talk about like the Raptors, because I love my city, and I hate my city, and right now is the most annoying time to be in Toronto, because Toronto wants to tell the world that it loves Black people, and that's just so annoying. It's just so annoying that Kawhi Leonard is being offered a multi-million-dollar condo to stay in Toronto to re-sign with the team, while Black women are calling me on the phone to talk about being abused in a shelter. It's really annoying. So I'm having a Toronto moment right now, but you know, it's still Go Raptors tonight.
Thank you. I see Sister Lynn Jones coming in, so I'm hoping she's finding us. Does someone want to run out into the just direct her? We are experiencing geographical injustice. People are texting me like, where the heck is this? I've been wandering the mount for 20 minutes. Thank you, Desmond, who's getting Lynn, and Yusra, I'm going to throw to you.
Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you, Al, for inviting me in this space and allowing me to be here today to share some of my Black thoughts. I'm very appreciative of it. So my name is Yusra Khugoli. I am a Black feminist organizer, activist, educator, and I co-founded the Black Lives Matter Toronto movement, as well as the Black Liberation Collective movement here in Canada. A lot of people don't really know much about the Black Liberation Collective. It essentially came out of resistance efforts that were happening across the world, where students were fighting back against anti-Black racism on their campuses, from South Africa to Missouri to Toronto. We were able to see the linkages between the ways in which anti-Blackness manifests itself in the university, and we decided to create a group that was not attached to the university, but could hold it accountable and create spaces for Black students to be politicized with a Black radical queer feminist lens. And a lot of our work is centered around challenging anti-Black racism, creating safe spaces for Black students to be able to come together, to learn, to resist the curriculum, to heal from the curriculum, to create alternatives for ourselves. And ultimately, our vision is to have a Black-only university and create Black-only spaces in education for Black students, because we are no longer, we no longer believe that our liberation, nor our peace, health, our wholeness as people can be achieved in an inherently white supremacist, ableist, sexist, anti-Black, queerphobic, and all of it space, which is the university. So I want to talk about how I came here to Canada, because I think that informs a lot of how I think about justice and freedom. So my mother immigrated here to Canada when I was around 7 and 8 years old, and we ended up being basically deployed to Hamilton, Ontario, which was like one of the most deeply destabilizing experiences that I've had in my life, like going from like a Black majority country, like Black people all around me, coming to Hamilton and like experiencing the white supremacist, like racist culture shock, and also just like experiencing like the shock of like the propaganda that is given to us when we are in the continent about coming here to like this like benevolent, multicultural, like beautiful, like endless land of opportunity, to coming to Hamilton and being called a nigger. And my brothers, who are Muslims, are visible Muslims, and wear jalabiyas, which is like a white Muslim garb that men wear for prayer, being called Osama bin Laden's and being called terrorists. So like this was happening live in Hamilton, and to me, while I was growing up, I always felt that there was a fragmentation of myself that became more pronounced when we were brought here, right? Like like my parents did not choose to be here. Many immigrants that come from the continent aren't choosing to really be here. Like we are here by force and by way of colonialism, because colonialism is ravishing and destroying our lands, right? And in specific, like Sudan, my current country is going through like a revolution to undo and to reclaim back our sovereignty, our land, our country, right? From, the clutches of British colonialism, the Ottoman Empire, and a lot of people don't know that Canada has been directly linked to the colonization of Sudan by way of the British Empire, right? So before even the transatlantic slave trade, there were Canadian troops that were in Sudan working to fight against anti-colonial resistance efforts that were happening with our people. So this colonial entrapment is long-standing. It happened before the transatlantic slave trade, post the transatlantic slave trade, till today. Till today, we see Canadian troops in Sudan, have bases in Sudan, are continuing to, create instability, have been very much a big source of even what has caused the split between our countries through foreign aid and giving support to these developing countries. So to come back, I can't think of freedom and justice outside of the frame of not thinking about my forced immigrant experience here in Canada, right? And the context of colonialism pushing families, so many Black people across the diaspora, through this vicious system that Canada is implicated in. So I wrote a thesis that I theorized this thing called Black Turbulent Consciousness. And in that, I basically was thinking through what Du Bois gave us, which is double consciousness, which is to think about the fragmentation of the self and soul and being both a slave and being an American, right? Being Black and being an American, and what that does, that dissonance does to our psyches, to our beings, to our hearts, to our spirituality, to our everything, right? So I thought about double consciousness and I said, yo, that's happening to me on a triple level, okay? Because I thought about the ways in which, like, I'm Sudanese and I could not even have an upbringing in Sudan because of the war in my country, that my parents had to move to Nairobi, Kenya, right? And I had to create and form a new Black consciousness that wasn't Sudanese, right? Because I had to grow up in Kenya. And then we had to be displaced once again to come to Toronto, right? So I have a triple sense of Black consciousness because I have my Sudanese ancestry, and then I have my upbringing in Kenya, and then I have my upbringing here in Canada, right? Where I'm being told I'm Black, so all of these colluding, colonizing forces that have created all of these, different consciousnesses of being Black has made me think, what is really freedom and justice for real? For real. Because if we really think about, what structures and apparatuses, form the global order today, it's literally white supremacist, heteropatriarchal capitalism. There is no justice in that, and there is no freedom in that. And even the concept of Black people, how Black people have been imagined by white supremacy is that we are not human. We are chattel. We are property of the state. We are laborers, right? We are not human. So how, in any possible way, can we really think about justice and freedom when we are not even thought of as human as Black people, right? And I think about the fragmentation of my Black self, my Black consciousness, and now trying to imagine justice and freedom here, and I cannot do it because the systems that govern this society are inherently what is destroying my homeland, right? And destroying the continent that is where my ancestors are from, where I belong, right? And let's not even talk about the damages of Black people in the passageway that have lost even connections to ancestry, have ancestors in the waters, right? So we have so many intricate complexities to think through when we're talking about justice and freedom, and I don't think that anything close to justice or freedom is possible in the iteration of our current world today, and in the iteration of the power structures of white supremacy, capitalism, sexism, heteropatriarchy, queerphobia, etc., etc. We cannot achieve freedom and justice unless this entire system is abolished, revolted. And we really need to understand that, reforms, there's a complexity living in this capitalist world, right, where it is now become so, we have embodied capitalism, right? And I actually believe that the door of no return has happened when we were put on that boat, right? So we really need to think about, while we are here, the reforms that we are fighting for, right? The little punches to the empire that we are fighting for, right? That cannot be justice or freedom. That is a means to keep us alive as we are pursuing, right? Our collective justice and freedom. And that is where our work actually, I feel, lies, because another complexity lies in the fact that whenever we create movements of resistance that work to give us language, that work to name our condition, that work to create a mass mobilized consciousness, the empire, the white supremacist empire, co-opts us, right? And then also picks specific ones of us that they know are seduced by whiteness and that are willing to broker Black people, broker Black bodies for capital, for self-advancement, right? So we are in a very dangerous time, right? Where even within our family, we are having those of us that are being chosen by white powers and seduced by whiteness to continue to uphold this condition that keeps us incarcerated or dead, right? Or living a life that is pretty much like death, right? So yeah, I can't think of justice and freedom without thinking of it through all these complexities, but also with the understanding that like reform is not going to work. Reform is actually here for middle class, like white people, right? That is who these policies are reflecting, tangible impacts in their lives. Those of us who are in the peripheries are completely left out of it, and there's no way that we can actually think of justice and freedom when this is the structure, right? So I just want to end off by saying that the work that I do, just as a black organizer, a black educator, a black public intellectual, I feel is like to shift culture and to shift the mass consciousness on how we think of and articulate freedom and justice, right? Because I don't actually believe we have the language yet. I don't think we have the language to talk about freedom or justice yet, because we really need to think about it outside of the frame of this current power structure. And I think when we start doing that is when we will have an idea of a possibility that we can coexist collectively, that doesn't have all these punitive structures deciding who lives and who doesn't, who is superior and who isn't, who's human and who is not, right? So, yeah, I just want to say that.
Thank you, Yusra and Carl. You know you're.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much for having me, Al, for inviting me and for being on the panel with all these renowned people who have been very much at the forefront of having us rethink what we've been doing all these years. When I started thinking about it, I started thinking, where did I start this work? And I started as a youth worker many years ago. And at that time, I remember working with youth. Many of them had come from Jamaica. This was in the 80s. They'd just come, and they were, and I remember being brought into this community organization because black youth had come into this space, and it was largely, this was in Regent Park area. Largely all the youth there were largely white, and there were some African Nova Scotians among them. And then there were these group of black youth who came in, and the organization, and there were some fights, and so I was brought in to work with the black youth. And then, so my work started paying attention to what were the experiences of black youth, especially those who were immigrant, because at that time, you would remember after 1971, we started getting a significant number of Caribbean youth coming to Canada, joining their parents, and also a number of Nova Scotian youth were also moving to Toronto. Black Nova Scotian youth were also moving to Toronto, and so that was setting the composition of the community there. And of course, our teachers and schools did not know, quote unquote, how to deal with these youth, how to deal with these parents. The parents were just simply handing their children over to school and allowing the school to take care of these kids. And so my work in advocating for these youth started then. And then I paid it, after I started doing research, my early research work was with these youth all along. And it's interesting, if you look at what I found then, the 1980s, early 1980s, what these youth said then were what youth today would say, exactly the same. The same words would come out of today's youth mouth. So nothing has changed. And so what have we done? So one of the ways I've always thought of how we might want to do a bigger look at things, I've always advocated for data. And you know, in Canada, we do not have data with regard to blacks, or we always hidden under the visible minority group. And I think we should always pay attention to what that hides. and how it continues to be the work of the government, everyone, to keep this visible minority notion going. So I've always advocated about it. And one would wonder, how would sociologists and all these social scientists, why would they, knowing that these groups who come under the visible minority are having different experiences, and therefore, how could you really, in any kind of a ethical way, just simply lump these? Nevertheless, that has happened. And so I've been keeping all the reports written about black youth and black education since the 1970s. And so I know the average student survey in the Toronto Board of Education in the 1970s, the black report in Nova Scotia, all these, I've been keeping them. So looking at them, I have been able to get a big picture of what the situation is and how it has been for black youth. The sad thing is nothing has changed. And there's data, and Toronto District School Board now has data. But what happens beyond the data? So you know, we're getting boards now to collect data, but what happens beyond the data? We just simply push out those data and nothing is really working. So I think while we might advocate and should advocate for this, I think we're at the stage now, and with respect to the point that we don't have the language, we should be pushing boards and pushing all these businesses, et cetera, to not only collect data, but live up to some commitment to move beyond just simply telling us what the situation is, to construct some response to the situation that we keep finding ourselves. And so recently I was also introduced to a new group of data from the Census Canada looking at blacks and poverty. So this guy had collected it, and he wanted to bring it to the community to find out, how do I understand it? What it showed is that looking at 2006, 2010, and now 2006 and 2016, blacks, while poverty rates for all other immigrant groups reduced over time, black youth poverty rate remains the same. So even among third generation who've been here, a third plus generation, that means nothing has changed beyond the years. So we are, as we talk about moving towards getting things to our community, we can use this data, but we must also be activist about it, beyond just simply collecting data. I think also here of most recent issue about To Kill a Mockingbird, which was one of those big things in Toronto. And one wonders why, and I've been involved with school boards asking them, why don't you remove that book? I know Nova Scotia has done its best with that, but somehow this whole idea of banning books, the whole idea of the neoliberal kind of idea, we don't ban books, especially for students. But that's okay. But are teachers able to work with the ideas in the book in effective ways so that it doesn't re-inscribe racism or re-injure black youth as they go on? I was at the school board, I did some research with this before there's this whole discussion of To Kill a Mockingbird. So it was about 6 months before this became a media thing in Toronto. I did some research with the school board, suggesting, and then the number of black youth I interviewed in focus group talked about being called nigger over and over again and the pain that they were experiencing. Then this became a big media report. But somehow the board is now making this connection between kids are asking, calling for something to be done with this pain that they experience, but we're not getting any movement. We're not getting any movement. And therefore, the fact is we're stuck. We're stuck beyond moving beyond these things. So we need to go beyond the work we're doing to do the activist kind of ideas and activist work. And I with my colleagues here, and we talked about, especially I was influenced by, Desmond was saying, we're all in spaces like universities where we're caught between the work that we want to do and how to be able to navigate the racism, both in the university and in the school board, and also navigate the racism that you will experience trying to do research that you want to bring some change to students' lives. And we're always caught, how do we do this? How do we keep our place inside, advocating without being shut out, and at the same time, we have helping to move the organization towards being more responsive to the needs that we're naming. It's constantly one of those things that we're constantly negotiating and have difficulties sometimes in working with. You know, one last point I was thinking about, and in coming here, I was looking at all the newspaper articles that were talking about the number of black youth and that were named and the situations they experienced. The newspaper article in Montreal, there was a youth in Montreal, newspaper articles in Ottawa, newspaper articles in Halifax, newspaper articles in Toronto. So this thing is not limited to any one space. And the how schools become not only a learning space, but what schools have become, it's the space where the whole imprisonment and so forth continue to be one of those things that looms. You know, I remember reading an article, a journal article, and this father was talking about his 4-year-old son, and they were in the playground, and these two kids were playing, his black son and this white little girl, and they were playing. And I don't know, sometimes you see children playing, and you know, children sometimes can be in their way rough with each other. And the boy and girl, and the girl started to cry. And the poor boy, the little boy did not understand why she was crying, because he thought they were playing quite nicely. And so he looked quite innocently to his father while this girl was crying, because he didn't think he did anything. And his father looked and did not say much. Then the little girl's brother came up to the boy and did the necessary kind of chiding him and, you know, berating him for what he did to his sister. And the father went on to say, it's not school to prison pipeline, it's playground to prison pipeline. Here's where the boy learns and understands his limitation. This kid understands his limitation. Here's where the white girl and the white boy understand how he might operate in ways to influence and to control the behavior of others. So it's not only at high school and school, we have to think about what's going on in these early years. And one last point I wanted to make. You know, we focus lots on schools, and I think sometimes we need to focus on colleges and universities too. When we're sending our kids to colleges and universities, do we pay attention to the curriculum? Do we pay attention to the space? Is the space welcoming? Is the space providing them the necessary kind of education that they need and engaging them in ways? Black students have the highest dropout rate when it comes to university. I have the data of students who've gone to university, York University in Toronto, and black students tend to have the highest dropout. The data I have shows about only 50% of students, black students who go to these universities graduate compared to 70 and 60 of other groups. We need to look at all levels of education in order to, if we're going to do the work to address the kinds of situation we find ourselves in, all of us.
Thank you, Carl. OmniSoore is being the paparazzi here.
Make sure I get all the fire.
The first question I wanted to ask, and this was a thread that came through everybody's remarks, I wanted to think a bit more into this idea of organizing this age of neoliberalism, or the diversity age, right? So OmniSoore talking about BCSA gets into Congress, and here we are at the Congress of Humanities, and people are being racially profiled, even as we sort of made it into this space. Yusra talked quite explicitly about this, the challenges of, we have a broader liberation project, and then you called it landing small punches on empires, this kind of idea that we get a diversity position or we get some funding. They recently just announced funding today, actually, that there's going to be $4 million for crime prevention in Halifax. So that's our cost of being racially profiled, right? They're going to scatter some money across the community to community groups to prevent crime. And if we play the game, we can get that money, right? Rather than organizing together. And Carl, of course, you were also speaking about this, like, we don't even have the data for where we are, but then we're being again sort of told that we're included. So how do we organize something bigger than that with all these challenges, both within our communities of, like you talked about, Yusra, the kind of temptations, the seductions of whiteness was the phrase you used, that so easily break our solidarity. And also, of course, within institutions where, we can be professionals and we can be lawyers and judges and we can be police chiefs, but is that really Black liberation? So I know that's a long-ass question to ask, and I don't know who wants to take it first. Desmond's looking thoughtful, so maybe I'll...
I'm thinking, I don't know yet, I don't know. I mean...
struggle we are all in, for real.
It is a struggle. I have a quick story. Go ahead. Will that give me some time? Yeah. I want to make sure all of us are on fire up here, so if me telling a little story gives Desmond some time to get his thoughts together, I'm all about it. So I've been in the university in different positions over the last 30 some odd years. And I think it was when I was a senior administrator at York, working in the Center for Race and Ethnic Relations and the Sexual and Gender Diversity Advisory person, when I think I came to understand in an embodied kind of way the emptiness of these titles and the over-expectation of what the titles do. And Sarah Ahmed now has a whole canon just speaking about that very experience that I was having at York. But the experience at York taught me a bit about the way that systems work, taught me a lot about the way that systems work. So, yeah, it's cool that I'm the James R. Johnson Chair of Black Canadian Studies. I'm not gonna lie, I love the title. I'm not gonna lie, having this opportunity to do Black Canadian Studies in a field that never talks about Black people unless we're, objects of experiment. I'm all about that. I'm all about having that opportunity. And this position is also deeply steeped in African Nova Scotian communities. And seriously, who wouldn't want to be steeped in African Nova Scotian communities? So I'm all about that. But one of the first phone calls I got was I got a WhatsApp note from a student saying, I want to talk to you about the experiences for Black women and Black queer folks, and I'm just wondering, what you can do about that. And I was like, okay, well, let's try and change our focus. So if we believe that if we just tell the institution what our complaint is, and the institution will say, oh my God, my bad, I'm gonna change that for you, then we will always have a shitty time in university. But if we shift that, right? So there's one way that the university needs to do harm reduction pieces. But as Yusra was saying, our entire belief that liberation will be found in, some kind of tweaking of the institution. That is a false hope. But if we collaborate with one another to make sure that we meet our goals, right? So we can put the university to our use to the best that we can. So you want to go to medical school. How can we support you to do that? How can we bound around you and help you with that, help you with studying, help you with going to talk to that racist professor, help you with the workaround from that racist professor. Like, how can we do those things? I'm not saying you're going to get out of the university unscathed, but you will get out of the university with a medical degree. So how can we do that part? So if we look differently, if we look to ourselves and our comrades and our co-conspirators and be like, I'm going to work with you because I want us to study together and I want us to do these things, so we can survive the university, then that's a different dynamic than looking at the university and saying, why are you treating us so bad? The university is a stamp of colonialism. So, my undergrad days at York, there was a black line where sociology or poli-sci, and people were like, do not take a course with that person. Don't do it, don't do it. That person will make your life hell. Take a course over here, this person's taking that course with you, and then the two of you can work together, and the two of you can study together, and you can do these things, and you'll survive the course. So we had that as undergrads at York, and I'm assuming you still have that as undergrads, yes? You talk to each other about, like, the racist profs that you need to stay away from? Right? Yeah, okay. Did I give you some time?
Coming back to what, Yusra, what you were talking about earlier, too, just about the whole picture versus, like you were saying, the scrimmages, the little battles. The story that I told is not even like a victory. I was like, because I thought people were like, oh, like it's a happy ending to the story. And but it's okay. First of all, we can do all these things at the same time, right? So we can be happy that black woman is housed. For real. That's a good thing. It's not the end, but we should be like, that was an important and worthwhile thing to do. I think, but it's an example of, it's not even winning something in real life, it's staying alive. That is literally about that woman being able to survive. And she called at the point where she's like, I don't know if I can survive in here anymore. And so to feed back to what you're saying, the system that we keep asking to think a little more kindly or to change is producing that woman's call. The system produced that woman's call. She didn't. Not even the shelter did. The whole conditions, all the rules that I could tell you about how when this woman was evicted from one of this agency's shelters, she was evicted from using services at any of this agency's shelters downtown, and some of these companies in Toronto have like a monopoly on providing shelter services to the homeless. So they're in 17 places around the downtown. So now she didn't just get kicked out of one place. So I could spend the next 20 years trying to become the CEO of that agency. They don't call it a president, they don't call it an executive director. The head of this nonprofit agency that provides us housing and shelter and food is a CEO. So maybe I could fight to be the CEO so that in 20 years, I could get rid of the rule that says that when the woman was banned from one, she was banned from them all. And I could spend my career, and that's what legacy I would be leaving behind. That's why I feel like the answer in part to your question, Al, is that we have to work on a lot of different levels, but that there's an ideological piece that's missing for a lot of us. Those of us who are willing to engage in the charity work are always going to be here. Those of us who are even willing to open our wallet when we hear that somebody is in trouble, those people are always going to be around. We're not lacking for that part. I think what we're lacking in the struggle is exemplified by a talk I did at the Law Union recently. I was the only non-lawyer on a panel of lawyers, and we were talking about, I'm going to be bringing up this tomorrow, we were talking about video surveillance and how criminal defense lawyers love video evidence. When was Rodney King, Al? When was Rodney King? 92? 93? 92? Oh, 92. I was 10 years old. And my parents and I sat in the TV room and watched about a black man getting beat up on cam. That was 27 years ago. How much more evidence do you need? But in this conference of lawyers, this is good for them. They're winning more cases. They're getting more charges dropped over Black death and suffering. When I started talking about, what if we disarm these police officers? Go to the source, as it were. You're the only person in town around to walk around with a machine gun and a shotgun and a taser and a mace that you can put in my eyes and a baton. You're the only person that has that authority. And the law says that if you are afraid of me as a Black person, you can literally take my life. And that's not murder. That it's not murder, that it's not a crime, not humanness, right? This notion that like when it happens to us, it's not really what you thought it was. But when you say in a group of like white criminal defense lawyers, why don't we just go to the source and take away their weapons? It's like what we talk about with carding, Al. We could tell the police what to do, but they won't listen, so let's negotiate. We could tell our oppressor to get his knee off of our neck, but he probably won't listen. That's what's missing, I think, because the people who are doing criminal defense law cannot just, for example, represent their clients, they can advocate for their clients. And when they have their law union that I got invited to that does advocacy, they can do advocacy to spend tens of millions more on body cameras, or disarm the police. They can do either, but they're choosing to do the thing that reinforces the institution. That's what's missing, is that people who are placed alongside us in these institutions, people who fight with us in the street, people who are on the radio, people who are in the media and in these journalism places, ideologically they can't commit to what's necessary. They're scared. And it's left to Black people. And it's left to the work that we have to do, but it's also like this example with the body cameras. It's literally like, once some more of you get brutalized, and we can capture that and convince a white person with a lot of power that that was wrong, maybe you'll have a better day. Maybe. But we don't want to get to the real meat. We don't want to talk about the Ontario Public Service for a little while in 2017 said no suspension of racialized workers. If a worker identifies as a racialized person in the Ontario Public Service, you are not allowed to suspend them. You know why they didn't do that the whole time before, right? Because if you create a system where you don't punish Black people, they're going to run amok, obviously. They're going to tear the walls down. That's the story, right? But it didn't happen. The moratorium is over now. Doug Ford is premier, and I think it might have even happened before Doug Ford. We should stop blaming everything on him, but yeah. The moratorium said, we won't allow Black people to be treated like this, period. I always think that there are steps towards this freedom, there are steps towards the justice that we want to see, but some of those steps involve going for the pillars that are holding this thing up. And so that is being able to punish us in the ways that you were talking about, the punitive things, and eliminating those punitive things, knowing that any punishment system that you have in education, in workplace, in the institution like the academy, and the police, any punishment system that you have is going to hurt us and Indigenous people in different ways and more toxic and catastrophic ways than anybody else in the society because of the history. We have to focus on that and believe that, and we have to implore other people who say that they're working on our behalf to adopt those values, to stop telling us that body cams and safe school acts and the like are going to, and child welfare improvements in a system that shouldn't even be touching our children. I'm gonna stop, but 87% of the kids who get taken away in Manitoba are taken away because their parents are poor. Yeah. We think child welfare is about you beat your kid and then they come take your kid and save them from you. That's a government figure, it's not my figure. It's the government's own figure. 87% of the kids that they take into care are taken into care because their parents don't have money. Abolish that system. Don't fix that system. Abolish that system because you're not even using it the way that you say you are. But for us to get our comrades or our prospective comrades to that place, that's like what's missing for me in a lot of these cases.
I just want to go off that and also say that I think we need a desperate, dire, we're in a severe, ethically bankrupt, social activist community. Really and truly, I think what we're missing ideologically is the ethics and the principles to for the commitment for justice and freedom. And what actually has happened is there's a lot of performativity, a lot of manipulation. We have a lot of people that are using these positions of power for self-indulgence, for self-advancement. And I actually believe that we cannot have this ethical reckoning without actually us really thinking about like the fact that we don't have principles and integrity, like in this community, facts, okay? And it's steeped in a lot of like carceral like logics, like a lot of prison logics, right? In terms of how we deal with one another, how we deal with each other in conflict, how we deal with each other's messiness, right? We are colonized people, right? We are coping through racism and colonialism and white supremacy, right? Yet the culture of our social activism is very much one that is putative, right? And only allows for binaries to exist, does not allow for complexity and different narratives. Only single stories can be told, right? So like this is the issue, is that we are like ethically bankrupt, period, okay? And I also feel, I don't think that there can be an actual sustained social movement for justice, right? Without like finding ways to diminish like class temporalities and class disadvantages amongst how we organize, because that seems to be a big thing that comes up, right? Many people want to climb up and eat the crumbs. Many people want to have that like high up government position and will do whatever they can, right? And at the expense is people who are not able to feed themselves, not able to even sustain themselves, right? So there's like class hierarchy that keeps operating itself in how we even sustain ourselves as a social justice community needs to be taken apart. And I think if we even find ways to accumulate our resources as a community, share our resources as a community, I think we can create spaces for collective like unlearning, right? For collective reimagining of a new possibility. Because if you don't have to worry about getting to a place, whether there's going to be food at the place, whether your child can be taken care of, whether you can get support if like you're not able to make the next rent, right? If there's a community that you know is gonna have your back and is gonna deal with these like I want to use the word that it's like I don't want to use a pathological term, but I want to say like these black life moments that completely destabilize us, right? And like take us completely out of our day and out of our body, right? Like we need to actually cultivate communities of care that are legitimately ethical and legitimately about people and our wellness, right? And I don't think that even we're able to get to the strides that we can if we don't even start to deal with these things, because we see the same systems reproduce themselves over and over again. We see the same people who are talking on the same panels, who are advising the government on the same shit, who are collecting data on the same topics, who are continuing to talk about our black death, black trauma, right? Our black condition, right? But nothing is moving, right? If anything, those reports are stacking up, those conferences are getting more publicized, right? Those PR moments, those pats in the backs, those black figureheads that are being put in positions of power, they keep staying there, and our condition keeps getting worse. So, yeah.
I wanted to, so I was thinking about a moment that happened after Hurricane Katrina in the Ninth Ward. So Hurricane Katrina, 2005, right? So post Hurricane Katrina, a group of black queer activist folks, I guess, got together in the Ninth Ward to establish a community of care. And so it was a health center, so they made sure that predominantly the black folks that stayed or could not get out ended up having access or had some kind of health, natural health remedy to respond to their insulin, to respond to high blood pressure medication, to respond to heart medication, like these kinds of things. And so they put together this community of care and worked with local like midwives and caregivers, right? The folks that would offer health interventions, because in the United States you have to pay to go to the doctor, and so all of these systems had disappeared. And as we understand in the as an outcome for Hurricane Katrina and what was happening in Lower Ninth Ward, for the politicians and many of the, kind of capitalisty folks, they're like, good, this is a cleansing. We can now like reap all of this land and kind of create something else. And so when I think through this moment of having sustained health moments or sustained activist moments, I think of that moment of hurricane, after post-Hurricane Katrina, and then earlier than that, the health clinic set up by the Black Panthers, right? And then, so Black Panthers set up a health clinic with free food, right? But then I also think about some of the conversations I've had with Black medical students who are interested in, say, working in North Preston or working in East Preston or working in African Nova Scotian communities, to be able to provide, to help stabilize care, right? In communities where the state is like, you have to travel 2 hours, or no, there's not a doctor here, or call the line and we'll diagnose you and treat you over the phone, right? But then I also think about those in our families or those in our communities who are elderly, right? So who are 89, and living in a home that's infested with cockroaches or bed bugs, but not really having any kind of system in place to go grocery shopping for that person, or to bring in a new mattress, or to, and those are kind of extreme pieces, but even to offer fellowship, to offer friendship, right? And so there's this thing that says we should have friends in all age groups, but I'm not sure everyone can name a friend older than 50 or 60 or 70, but let's get 80 and 90, and 100, as a part of expanding what I think you meant by these, or how I interpreted when you were talking about a community of care. For me, that's kind of, these pieces are the piece that I also think need to be involved in that. I'm not saying you did say it wasn't, but it's how I think.
What I thought about when you asked your question was how often, especially in more recent times, where how often as a community and organization, we constantly applying to government for program money. And most of the time, so when the program money is for 3 years or less, etc., then when that program money is finished, then the program finishes. And we never move towards seeing how we need to build infrastructure to go beyond these programs and start thinking of how best can we use and get our advocacy work to not just simply be time limited but ongoing. And so there is a need for moving beyond just simple programs, and probably if we don't move that way, we're going to constantly be restarting, and we never get anywhere to building the kinds of infrastructure that's going to move us beyond just simply where we are today.
You look like you're going to say something. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, how do we build an infrastructure that best suits us, that's not part of a capitalist structure, right? And I mean, all aspects of capitalist structure: competition, yes. Jealousy, the talented tens, zero-sum game, theoretic. Like how do we build that infrastructure? Maybe that's not the right word, or that community that not only disrupts the current capitalist system that we're all implicated in, right? Like I need to pay rent, right, apparently, or else they'll kick me and put me on the street. Like I need to get groceries, like you need to budget when, like whatever. So we're all implicated in a capitalist system. And there's also that black tax, right? You all know what the black tax is? Like you get a salary, but you pay, like you're like supporting like 20 people in your family, not only in Canada and North America, but abroad, but you still have money for like, oh, I need to help that sis get into whatever, you know what I mean? Here's the $5, I'm sorry, it can't be more, but I just did Auntie's card thing, you know what I mean? Like black tax. And so what does that infrastructure look like in a way where, I can say, no, boo, I can't get out of bed today, I just need to be here, but I'll tweet the hell out of it or something. Like, what does that infrastructure look like?
I mean, I think we have informal examples of it everywhere through the kinds of different work that we do, that we cobble things together. Like, I mean, we're sitting on the stage with somebody here who's managed to have a lifeline with hundreds of people who are incarcerated. You know, how do you do that? You cobble together whatever resources that you have, right? You use whatever connections that are available to you in the moment, and it's messy, and it's incomplete, and sometimes you can't literally answer the phone. I'll always answer the phone. That's why we love you. But we are limited, but we're cobbling. Like, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is that, so maybe some of you heard about this story out here. It was actually a story that got a national attention. There were two women who said that were filing a lawsuit, not just against the government, their employer, the Ontario Public Service, their public service workers, but also against their unions. Who's getting all of our money? Besides, these considerations for me are always about our time and our energy and our labor. So we have to spend time working somewhere, like you said, in order to survive. So when we do that, we give a whole bunch of our money in dues to unions. Black people are not represented by unions in Canada. Can we just say that? So all of that money now is going in a hole. Because when a black worker gets harassed at the workplace, gets told that they can't move up because they weren't having the qualifications when they have the same qualification or more qualification than other people, and then they go to the union is also engaging in anti-black racism. So the union says, that doesn't sound like a big deal. You probably weren't as qualified. The union says, you know, that person, you say they harassed you, that doesn't sound like harassment, you sound like you're being really sensitive. And so the workers are paying their money that they earned and putting it aside for a union that is never going to use that money to protect them. And we could cobble together a little more here and there if, again, this crazy radical idea, but I mean, let's try to start thinking like this way. People need to decertify from these unions and start building their own like labor collectives. Because you're paying and they're not giving you anything anyway. So if you have a really shitty but small black labor union, you still have more than what you have now, because right now you have the false promise that somebody's going to protect you for thousands and thousands of dollars a year that you're never going to see. The biggest thing I'm encountering in like labor stuff with people who are actually unionized who like achieve that little bit of a class bump is that it still doesn't matter when they're in trouble. Because the union is as racist as the employer, and the union does not recognize their issue and their struggle as being racism and white supremacy. So they're just throwing their money that could be supporting other people in the community into a pool that when the white person, the white woman especially says, I was discriminated against, who's getting the best lawyer now? Who's getting the campaign within the union and the organizing now? That person is, but that's our money that we can't get back. So I actually think like, it's scary. If you're the police, how do the police, black police, pay into that police association that goes out into the street and talks shit about Mike Brown and Tamir Rice and Jermaine Carby and Andrew Luku? Black people who are law enforcement pay a union to go and talk about our brothers and sisters like the way that these cops talk about us. We would be better to decertify, even if our union that results from it is small and feeble. To start off with, it would be better than what we have now, because what we have now is a fake promise.
I actually wanted to pick up on that going into the next question. When you're talking about the police union, because of course, Yusra, you experienced a tremendous amount of violence from like police spokespeople going through your Twitter back like 5 years. And I was thinking about what you said, Carl James, about the To Kill a Mockingbird, because I was thinking about predictabilities of these cycles, right? So Toronto last year gets in a to-do that, oh no, you're trying to remove To Kill a Mockingbird, which people under to-do like 15 years ago here, right? Like, oh no, like you're pulling books in the curriculum. And it's like the exact same discourse. It hasn't moved at all. So we did it here, we had to go through it here and talk about how there's never a historical case of a white person saving a black person from a lynching from public events. They had postcards, they sold them, like it was cool, it was good, they didn't save people from them. And then, like why do we teach a Black Canadian book, why do we teach this book, so on. We did all of that, and it didn't make any difference to white people, because 20 years later they're in Toronto being like, isn't this like crushing free speech? So I just think about that, right? One reason also why I wanted to have people from Toronto coming in isn't because we can't organize on our own in Nova Scotia. We've been organizing, but it's because I think that sharing some of that knowledge about just these historical cycles is really important. Like you guys dealt with your Wortley report 7 years ago, and we're going through the exact same machinations. Like, oh, we can't stop carding because they'll keep doing it. Oh, like you need to come to the table and negotiate. And I know that in 2 years it will be all the same steps that, you know, that we experienced in Toronto and trying to break that. So I guess it was two questions. One is about kind of organizing against predictable outrage, like the stupidest thing going on right now, but also really painful is with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls report, where it's like, oh, I would have been with this report, but you guys said genocide. So, you know, now we just, you know, so like this false outrage, but this very like theatrical fault that now we can just ignore all of this because the issue is this word they use, even though you explained exactly why you use this word, but we're not even gonna bother reading that, right? So I guess one is this question about this kind of outrage that we deal with, and two is, I guess, about these repetitive cycles and how we organize outside of that, or how we deal with that, right? That we're always coming back to the battles we already fought. And it's always as though they're new, and then we're always encountering them again and again and again, and wasting our energy, you know, rather than being able to build collectively and build on what happened in the past. So that's not really a question, that was a statement. People have their own additional statements to add to that. And actually, because we're being so long in these questions and statements, after this, we'll go to the audience to ask us questions. So this is the last one you get from me.
What I was also going to say about Toronto and the N-word is some of the ways that these schools have decided that they're going to respond to it is to introduce a policy where to use the N-word is students will be.
I'm going to interrupt to tell you a story that I have a friend who taught, but she taught a hip hop course in the States. And one part of it was to perform historical songs so that students would get the sense of the rhythm, but she said, like, white students couldn't use the N-word. Like, so you guys just skip it. She's like, I'm not going to tell black students how they can and can't do it, so you guys make your own decisions. But white students went and complained that they couldn't use the N-word, and the university tried to make a policy that either everybody can use the N-word. So we literally have a policy that white people either get to say, what they really wanted to say is no one can use it. But then they were like, well, if anybody can use it, then we all have to get to use the N-word. So they literally created a policy, like white people can't use the N-word in this class because that would be equal. And then she lost her job. So. Sorry to interrupt with that story.
No.
That's a policy.
So you understood where I was going with this. and so that's the problem. Also, when you talk of the police and all this kind of thing, and you talk of the union, it's always the same thing. What the education that these white people have, especially union, and the same as the managers, the bosses, etc., etc. So how do we turn the whole thing around? Is one of the ways we ask.
That is what I mean when I talk about like surveillance technologies. So now, if what I hear, how we're going to solve this problem, if I as a white person hear a black person say that word, I'm going to go tell on them. That was your answer to the problem? Like, it's unbelievable. But this for me is a question of, as a journalist, it's a question of audience. Who am I actually talking to? Because I work on a right-wing radio station, does that mean I'm talking to the people who listen to that radio station nonstop? So I grew up in a house where the radio was never off. We listened to radio all the time in my house growing up, but it was CBC. And you never touched the dial for any other, you don't put your music. We had to get our own radio to put our own music station, but the radio in the house is for CBC. You're not allowed to turn the dial, right? There's this notion, maybe, that if I'm there and I'm participating in that nastiness, like, okay, I'm stuck. Like there's something so evil and so overwhelming about that thing that you can't really intervene there and make a difference. I don't agree with that. Like I think that we're all trying to make our interventions in the spaces that we have an opportunity to do that, as long as we know who our audience is. I'm not talking to the people. I honestly have created an audience that would never listen to that radio station unless I was there. That's been my work for 4.5 years, is to make people who would never ever, and who may still never ever listen to that radio station at any other time of the week, for that 1 hour, they're like, let me tune in and hear what this is about today. It's to take that little thing and to know that my audience are people like that woman who called me, who I didn't know, who I had no idea is listening, who I'm just like, this is who I'm reaching out to when I'm doing that show every week. My audience and keeping focused on that is going to prevent me from a lot of what I've been seeing this week. So like, I've been doing really well not being on Twitter this week while I've been working on my book, but I saw, related to this conversation about the murdered and missing indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people inquiry, I saw Jesse Wente. You guys know who Jesse is? He's a journalist and an arts columnist at CBC. He was in another conversation with a person whose name I don't even like to say on Twitter, Jonathan Kay. And if you don't know who he is, don't worry about it. But that's the point, is that I see Jesse, who's been in arguments on CBC television 2 years ago with this same ignorant white man about cultural appropriation. So it's these stages that we're setting up where a white person can argue with an indigenous person about whether or not stealing his culture is okay. And that CBC will facilitate that that's a conversation. Jonathan Kay is not my audience. I don't talk to him, I don't talk about him. You will never hear me mention him outside of this room. I don't talk to people like that anymore, because I have learned that that's part of the trap and the soul draining and the energy draining that takes us from what we actually want to do and the people who we actually want to talk to. You can be in an institution like this and still find your audience and still find your community. It doesn't mean that because you're in this space that's locked out to you. But you have to stay focused, because around every corner is like a white poli-sci grad who wants to say like, well, what about black on black crime? You know, like that guy is like around here right now waiting for us to finish this thing to come and disrupt our time, for real. He is, you all know him. So it's about knowing your audience and trying to stay true to that no matter what venue you're in, because it can get toxic.
I think that like the question that you asked is like literally what we are all like as people committed to justice, thinkers, activists, etc., that we like really struggle through. Like personally, that's what I really struggle through, and I really feel like in this time and place, especially in this context, like we don't have the power or the resources to out-organize white supremacy. And I think like at this point, like when we're taking the context of like centuries worth of generational wealth and like essentially a big white supremacist machine being lodged against us, right? That come with our fragmented like pieces of ourselves, trying to form a collective community. I don't want to be pessimistic, but I want to say the reality of our condition actually requires more out of us. Like it requires more courage. It requires more care and more of us looking out for one another in more tangible and meaningful ways than it does just now. Because I feel like we all have the language, we all want to say the master's tools will not destroy the master's house, but when are we going to act? Like when are we going to move past that point to actually like pick up the stakes, right? Because the stakes are really high. How much are we willing to give, right? And I also feel like this is a question that is more broadly to like white people, people of color, right? That have access to privilege and mobility in the system, right? Like what stakes are there for black people and how much are you willing to give? Because like at this point, white supremacy is out-organizing us because of the fact that we have a lot of liberal and in-between white people that are like, yeah, Black Lives Matter. But in the meantime, in between time, you're killing us, right? You're not doing anything to tangibly shift our condition. Rather, it's just the performativity that is happening. So I feel like we need to demand more out of ourselves, and I actually believe that if we start little by creating communities where access is there, we can create a mobilized political consciousness that can allow us to think about how to organize against white supremacy as like trained organizers, as studied people, as people who understand our condition, right, in accessible ways, right? But also have built an infrastructure that is able to support one another while we are doing these while we are going to battle, right? Because another thing that's real is climate change is real as a motherfucker, yo. And this world, the tangent, the trajectory that we are heading towards is that there will be no choice. There will not be no choice. And in the same ways that Black people are the first people to go out by the state, Black and Indigenous people, the next people up next is people of color, and the next people up next is white people, right? Of various intersections, because the system of hierarchy and power will always calibrate itself to protect the 1%.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, everyone is gonna get caught up, right? So if we are not able to have a collective consciousness, like an ethical one that requires bravery and courage, like in this moment, we will be forced to. I'm gonna say that, right? Yeah.
I was going to go to the audience unless you wanted to say something. We have time for some audience questions. There is a microphone. I know not everybody may be able to come up to the microphone, so if people who, want to, I don't know, I suppose I could move myself and hand the microphone around, but there is a microphone. Get the microphone somehow. Please pass it to your neighbors if you want. And yes, we have time for some questions. And while we're waiting for people to formulate questions, I was going to say that going back to one of the very first things you said, OmniSoore, about labor, like every single last Black academic's like, I just can't do it tonight. Like, I've been at Congress in Vancouver, I'm not coming. Like, I can't, that labor is real. Then the other half of Black people are like, I'm watching the game. Like, I need to chill. So, I mean, this is real, right? Like the demands on Black life that people can't even necessarily come in a room because of the trauma they experienced in the room they were in last week. I don't know if people want to ask us questions. Everybody's just looking in little spaces.
Do y'all need a minute to think of your questions? Because I can say something while you're all like thinking of your question. I didn't mention this before, which is odd, but I'm a Black femme, I'm a Black queer dyke, and part of my work, for me, the work that I do, both inside the university and outside of the university and within communities in various ways, around Blackness, has always involved Black, queer, and trans people, gender non-conforming folks, Black folks with disabilities. I tend to focus and spend time with folks with hidden disabilities, and increasingly Black elderly folks, and I mean elderly folks 80 and up. And so I've said for a minute now that the ways in which we deploy homophobia both inside and outside our communities is an act of white supremacy. And so if you're going to claim that you're down with the Black cause, and I'm here for Black people, I love Black people, but at the same time you're being homophobic, transphobic fucks, then you are not actually being down for your people. And it's not that you need to be like, well, if my son were, or if my sister is, or if my mother were. No. There's a way in which we can treat each other with care and kindness and respect that means that including, those of us who are sex workers, who are queer, who are street involved, who are drug involved, with various disabilities, have mental health issues that they're managing, who decided to medicate or not medicate, have self-medicated or not self-medicate, who are living non-respectable lives in the most vibrant way that they can imagine and we can imagine. That we too need to be centered in this work and in our commitments to Black life. Book launch June 26th, Toronto, Ontario, be there, don't be square. Black life.
That was good.
And I won't be there, but because I'll be here.
Hi, I really appreciate all that you all shared. I want to actually directly, address some of the questions you asked, because our ancestors asked the same questions about how do we collectively organize and how do we create infrastructure. I think one of the things that colonial education has done to us is that it has stripped us of our agency. It has stripped us of understanding that we actually don't need colonial structures, and it's convinced us that we need them. it's kind of like being in an abusive relationship. It actually is an abusive relationship where the abuser tells you that you need me. So I think we need to break up with capitalism. We need to break up with white supremacy. And I think we need to remember what our ancestors did. Because I look back at some of the writings from the 30s and from the 40s and from the 60s, and I see that black people were organizing conferences. They didn't have internet, they didn't have Facebook. So I think we have more than sufficient resources on some level. But I think what we have lost in the process of them kidnapping our children from us is that those children have not grown up on some level in tight communities. And so that understanding of love, the spirit of Ubuntu, has been stolen from us. It's a process of genocide. They have killed us. And I think we need to wake up from that. And in the process of waking up from that, we will reclaim our humanity. And I think we'll also start to remember the ways in which our ancestors did business, which were not in capitalistic ways. Some of our ancestors did capitalistic things, but a lot of our ancestors did business in ways that were based on how we could build a better community and how we can support each other. And as the brother said there about the government grants, if we keep asking the master for tools to assist us in destroying the master, it ain't going to happen. But I think we have a lot of chance to create worker cooperatives, to create credit unions, to create all these other things. So my question after that relative rant is the challenge we have. We're living in, I grew up on the west coast of Africa, in a place that was probably 90-something% black. And so we're living in a place where we're like 3% of the population, if we're lucky. And we're dealing with so-called well-meaning white people who seem to say that they're liberal, seem to say that they're down for the struggle, but then we see the devilish ways in which they interrupt and cut us and shoot us and kill us. So the question is, how do we do two things? How do we get the so-called woke white people to realize that they ain't woke? And second thing is, how do we create a prophylactic effect for our black people who are trusting white people too much? Because that shit's killing us. That shit almost killed me. So I'm wondering how are you guys doing with that in Toronto?
Yeah, we'll take a few questions and then maybe just kind of answer them all at the same time.
Thank you all so much for your presence and for your reimagining Black justice. I appreciate your comments about missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's very difficult for me. I suppress the thought of how terrifying it is to walk the streets as an Indigenous woman. I can't think about it as a survival mechanism. It's too hard to think about how scary living in this world is. But so I thank you for bringing that up. And also working in the health field. I completely understand that, and also see the thread of how community and economies of white supremacy are built on our brokenness and our pain. There are whole communities in my province of Labrador built off of foster children. Their entire economy functions off of the displacement of Indigenous bodies and children. So recognizing how systems are designed to continually reproduce themselves through our trauma, the health system being one of them as well. But my question is, how does spirituality play into your life or in your lives as activists?
Do we want to take one more, maybe, and then try them?
Hey, I really liked what was touched on at the end around climate change, because I think we're talking a lot about capitalism and oppression and interconnected to white supremacy. And I think climate change is really deeply rooted, that's the consequence, the current bigger consequence beyond what's happening to humans. It's what is happening to our entire environment. The environment's being oppressed and treated like shit, the same way black people have been treated like shit, the same way Indigenous lands have been colonized and destroyed. And how can these bigger connections even as maybe part of getting less woke, maybe white people more excited about getting charged up about fighting? Like, how could these connections maybe, I don't know, do they come up much in conversations? I guess I'm just wondering if there's any thoughts around that. Thanks.
Lynn, OmniSoore is asking if you have a question. And if you need to.
I want to know if you want the mic brought to you.
And I have, this is one of my more out there theories.
You want the mic brought to you.
But with climate change, I also have to worry that black people are going to be the only people that can go outside. And then what happens? Because we'll have to be re-enslaved. No, I mean, I know it's but I actually have this thought, right? That once the UV rays and it's hot, wasn't that the logic of why they were, I mean, it was actually about labor, but they said that black bodies need to be enslaved because white people couldn't stand the heat. So what happens when it heats up? I'm just saying.
Al?
Sister Lynn, please.
I really didn't have a question, which I must admit I usually do. I really enjoyed this panel and learning from the panel. So maybe I can just share some of my hurt moving around the campuses and with young people these days. And I've had the opportunity of doing a lot of different talks at the universities. And also as a labor activist, I can talk all kinds related to some of those issues, but we'll keep away from that for the moment. But also understanding things from younger people. I think at that, even a forum just on Sunday I was with. But the hurt, it's a reoccurring theme, and maybe we can talk about that, is how can we even consider that we're going to change the agenda as African people? How can we mobilize? How can we do all this social justice work when we don't even know each other's names? I was on St. Mary's, so I'm not talking about something that's not real. I was on St. Mary's University campus yesterday. There were a lot of, this a little while ago, and there were a lot of people, African people, and I mean globally African people, students. And I started talking to them at the event on the side and in the thing. And they could have been from the same place, like they could have been from the same island in the Caribbean. They could have been from different parts of Africa. Some of them were due to graduate with their masters and didn't know the other students who came even from the same country. They didn't know them, didn't know their names, hadn't worked with it. Ran into the exact same situation at Dalhousie. And the same thing happened. How are we going to change the agenda when we're not even addressing that our students don't know each other, aren't mobilizing, aren't working together? I had the opportunity of sharing with them. I attended the same campuses in the early 70s. There were so few of us that it didn't matter which part of the continent or the diaspora that you came from. We sat together, we ate together, we partied together. We still hold friendships, whatever number of years later, from wherever people are. And people nowadays can't even imagine it. So I just throw that out because it seems to me that it's just really simple. It's not big and philosophical, it's not academic or anything like that. It's just simple. And how do we start addressing that? The other thing I was thinking about as the panel was going on, and I really do believe that a lot of activism now has centered around photo ops, I call it. The photo ops. And I had a situation recently when Trudeau came, and I still haven't gotten over that, where the government hadn't addressed any of the issues, currently anything in our communities. The government hadn't spoken to, hadn't developed any programming or anything like that. Yet when he came to town, the African community was out in full force from invitations that were given out. A lot of it at the last minute, because we had, some of us had a demonstration plan. The people that were going to be at our demonstration ended up getting invites and didn't join. We still had a good demonstration, but they didn't end up joining the demonstration. Those same people wouldn't even say hello to us on the demonstration line. People we went to church with every day, people we talked with every day. And I'm long, but I was thinking afterwards, one of the young people who met, was around the Trudeau issue, and I happened to say, well, she brought up the topic, and I said, well, actually, I was there for the protest, and was totally upset. She said, yes, I know you were. Like, it's like we had done something so absolutely horrible. How could I not have appreciated that they had accolades from the Prime Minister for what? But anyway, I just, I don't know what we do with all of that. They're just thoughts, and I think it's worthwhile for the panel to address.
Yeah, so let's take these. So we have how you deal spiritually, so what spiritual practices, which is also tied to some of Lynn's points about alienation and how Black people can find other forms of community. We had a question about climate change and dealing with woke white people. Are those accurate summaries of that?
Yeah.
Okay, and we're gonna try and keep it short, so rapid fire, because Desmond's gonna kill us if we ain't out for this Raptors game, right? So we'll try and keep this under 10 minutes. I know, but people gotta get back. I promised we'd be back out for the Raptors game, so no paragraphs here. Sure.
Lynn, thank you for everything that you just said at the end. So, I'll just say briefly in response to you that when people treat you like the way that they did walking by you going into position, as we know, to receive that. That's why they were there, walking past you like they don't know you, sis. And like, when people do that as Black people, I don't want to organize with them. I don't want to work with them. When people exclude members of our Black family because of their identity, I don't want to work with them anymore, even if they're Black. That doesn't mean I hate them. It doesn't mean that I wish poorly for them. But like, another challenge that we have to think about is like, where do we have a conversation? I'm seriously like still trying to probe this. What would it look like for you and the other people who were in that demonstration to be in a room with the people who walk by you and to talk to them about how that made you feel? And what it did for our community here when we had a moment that we could have been more united, but some of us chose to have a photo opportunity. This is how that made me feel as a Black person, to you as a Black person. This is how it hurt me when you walked by. This is why I didn't want you to go into that building. I think that there's this mythical notion that there were maybe spaces, or that there have been or are spaces where we as Black people sit down and talk our shit. We don't. And I've been in some I'm gonna stop in a moment. I've been in some very controversial situations in the last year where I criticize other Black people and receive hell for it. And there was this overriding sense in the community, well, why don't you sit down with them, Desmond, why don't we all sit down? They don't want to sit down. They want to go and cape for their funding dollars and get their photo selfie next to the Prime Minister to show their friends. They want to show a respectability that is beyond something I can tolerate. If they would sit down in that room, Lynn, and hear you, I would be there convening it, I would be there to try and help facilitate or hold space or cook the food for it or whatever. I would do whatever anybody wanted me to. But my fear is that we also have to recognize that some of our people have made a decision out here, and they want to be in those spaces instead of here with us.
Anyone else in any of the other questions?
No, I think the idea of how we're going to sit down and talk with each other, that's important. How do we also live with the idea that we're going to have diverse approaches? And also only within the schools, but we're going to have to do some of this work within the community. And we have to do some of this work understanding that capitalism is at the root of what we're doing. So how are we going to start rethinking our space in relation to capitalism? And that's significant for me as a black person, as in a community. We're going to have to start analyzing and our role in this capitalist structure, and not thinking that we all have to be wealthy, we all have to be stars, we all have to be, there's a rethinking we have to do. And I agree with the idea that we haven't started getting the language or the construct in order to move. And so it's going to mean working together to get the language, to get the construct and move on. And we're going to have to probably sit down honestly. It has to be honest, sitting down.
I swear, like, because Lynn, I'm so grateful that you brought that up. But it's like, would people sit and hear you honestly about why you were so upset? Or is it too hard? And that's where I get stuck. When we haven't been used to having those kind of deeply honest and vulnerable conversations in community, how do we start right after something really catastrophic and destructive happened? How is that the time to now be like, I want to sit and look you in your eyes and talk deep truth? Yo, you just dissed me. You just completely ignored me in a moment in our community. So now how, this is what I struggle with, Lynn. I do all the time, is is there a way in good faith to bring people like that who could talk together in space together? And I just don't know how.
These are the heavy, these are the things that are weighted on my own mind as well. This very conversation, how do we, there's a shit ton of work to do. And so this idea of competition between who's doing what, I think is a waste of time, and it's a capitalist mentality. I have this little portion in medicine and health that I'm doing, and there's other work in medicine and health to be done. There's other work in other places to be done. I think there's lots of difficult conversations and honest conversations that we're not having. We're not having the conversation around anti-Black racism that's embedded in this delimited conversation between Indigenous and settler, where there's no kind of space created or conversation around the fungible Black body in that. There's no space for Black people in the conversation of Indigenous settler, right? There's no, where are we there? And so often there's never the conversation. There's actually, the very Canadian thing to do is be like, I don't see you, I don't know you, I don't, who dis, new phone. They're just not having a conversation with you because it's just I don't have time for that. There's, it's a weird position, to be in these positions of leadership, such a weird word to use, because you're deployed in a way to kind of take up a particular space. But since you're deployed in that way, it means that people get to critique how you do that. And none of that is easy, because people won't critique, some people will critique you in ways that aren't loving, right? Which is why I think it's important to continue to have community that'll sit you down and be like, sis, this was really good, but that sucked, right? Like you need those people that are actually talking to you through this commitment of love. And then around spirituality, I'm an Ifa priest. The Yoruba word is Babalawo, which usually means man, but that's how I was initiated. And so I work with altars, I work with Orisha. It's an earth-based indigenous spiritual practice. And it's one that often gets considered, is often treated as, devil worship because of the continuing overarching white supremacy of Christianity. It made it through the middle crossing. As Yusra and others will tell you, many of the folks who were enslaved in Canada were Muslim. Yet there's this overwhelming, reliance on Christianity amongst Black people. But also through the middle crossing came this Yoruba practice, which in Cuba is called Santeria, and Haiti is called Voodoo. And so I think there's ways in which that we've become so divorced through colonization from our own spiritual earth-based practices that we are also at a loss of ourselves. And so it's part of the way I live as much of a non-responsible life as I can manage. I'm wearing red lipstick today. Usually it's purple or green. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to add there.
We are at 9:10, and I know that,
Oh, no, I don't have a question. I want to make a point.
Yes, go ahead.
For something.
Okay. Yeah, we can take a 5 minutes. Go ahead, Shelley, and then Yusra, you can come back.
Can I?
Yes, go ahead, of course.
Okay. Okay, I just want to let the sisters know that on Saturday, June 15th, from 11 to 1, at the Black Cultural Center, we're having an information session with Rebecca Skeet, the director of the YMCA Employment Services, and Tanika Bundy, an budding entrepreneur of Queen and King's Natural Products. So anyone is interested in finding out more information on self-employment or regular employment, come. We're having a luncheon and door prizes. So, 11 to 1, Saturday, Black Cultural Center.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Yusra, I don't know if you want to maybe give us a final comment to take us out on the questions.
I wish I could answer all those questions that were brought up because I think some of them are just so necessary and so powerful. But I do want to answer just the spirituality question. And I'm born Muslim. The way that my parents raised me was not religious, but more spiritual. So the tenets of Islam were all around my house, my culture, my upbringing, etc. A lot of why I am the reason why I do the work that I do is actually because of Islam and what Islam has taught me in terms of how to respecting people, dignifying people, honoring them, always being hospitable to them, giving what you have, not expecting anything in return out of that care. So a lot of the things that move me as a person actually come from Islam, right? And for those of us that are Muslims and or no Muslims, we know that it's a spirituality of peace, of love, right? And actually undoes and challenges white supremacy and capitalism in its inherent nature, right? So even the ways that we share resources amongst Muslim communities without interests, and the ways that we give even the clothes on our back, we automatically practice anti-capitalist tenets, right? And also even the nature of Islam is very queer, right? In the way that we dress, right? We dress in very gender queer ways. There's variance and a multiplicity of how we express ourselves, but also even in the ways that we do gender roles, right? We share all responsibilities, and there's a nature that is and what I mean by queer is that we interrupt and we disrupt these rigid structures of how we are supposed to behave and treat one another, right? We are a very fluid community that allows for our humanity to be seen, actualized, and expressed and realized, right? with the deepest love. So that is what moves me to do my social justice activism, is because I'm a Muslim, and spiritually I was nurtured to be a Muslim, and that is what even gives me like the questions that I ask about like our future, our world, our humanity. Yeah?
Thank you, Yusra. And I'm actually going to bring us to a close so that we have time to get out of here. Thank you so much to the panel. That was absolutely brilliant. Speaking of spirituality, that was like jumping into a lake and refreshing myself by hearing all these voices. It is online available. We will live streaming, so it will still be available on YouTube as well. So if you want to share with people who couldn't be here, I really want to thank the Mount for hosting and funding this event. So thank you so much to Mount St. Vincent University. This funding came through the Nancy's Chair in Women's Studies that is paying for and hosting all of this. So I'm really grateful to the Mount for that. If you wanted to hear more from people and had questions that weren't answered, that means those of you who aren't in 9 to 5s, you can come here, same room, tomorrow, beginning at 9 a.m. And hear from workshops from Desmond and Yusra, and as well we'll have some space for conversation. So the afternoon is quite fluid. You don't have to stay till, we just put the afternoon in the schedule, but that's going to be quite a fluid space. So you don't have to commit the whole day, but certainly I would advise you, if you are able to come in the morning and take the workshop with Desmond and with Yusra, because they're going to be fire and amazing. So again, thank you all of you for listening. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Israel Jones for live streaming this, and we'll see you all tomorrow.
Also, I was just going to say, also don't forget to tune in to Black Power Hour Radio on Wednesday. We'll have Yusra, we'll have Desmond, and we also have Spec One who will be joining us as well. So.
All right, so have a good night, everybody. Drive safe, and everyone who's going to the game, you know.